It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon. The millionaire, Daniel Orlov, had taken a detour from his usual route after a last-minute business meeting was cancelled. His driver had dropped him off near a quiet street in a less familiar part of town while the car refueled. Craving a cup of strong black coffee, Daniel stepped into a small corner store with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign in the window that simply read, "Open." The store was quaint, old-fashioned even. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stocked with basic goods, sugar, flour, jars of jam. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, and for a moment, Daniel felt the comforting nostalgia of simpler days. But that moment evaporated the second he looked toward the counter. There she was. A young woman in a plain store uniform stood behind the register, carefully restocking a rack of gum. Her posture, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair was tucked behind her ear, it all stopped Daniel in his tracks. Time seemed to slow. He stared, heart pounding, unable to look away. She looked exactly like Anna. His breath caught. No, it couldn't be. Anna had died 7 years ago. A car accident on a rainy highway had taken her from him, or so he'd believed. Her body had never been found, swept away by the current after the crash, the authorities said. But seeing this woman now, it was like looking at a ghost made flesh. She glanced up at him, offering a polite smile, clearly unaware of the storm she had just awakened inside him. "Good afternoon," she said softly, her voice warm. It was her voice. That same melodic tone that used to greet him every morning. Daniel stood frozen, emotions crashing over him, shock, disbelief, hope, fear. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Could it really be her? Was fate playing tricks on him? The rational part of his mind screamed that it was just a stranger. A coincidence. A resemblance. But deep down, something told him otherwise. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This moment was the unraveling of a mystery he never expected to reopen. Daniel stepped back outside the store, his heart pounding in his chest like it was trying to escape. The crisp air didn't help clear his mind, in fact, it only sharpened everything. He leaned against the wall, hands trembling, jaw tight. It wasn't just a resemblance. It couldn't be. Her smile, her voice, even the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, it was all too exact. He felt dizzy, like the world had tilted beneath his feet. His mind transported him to the past with vivid, almost painful clarity. He saw Anna as she was, standing in their sunlit kitchen, barefoot, humming as she stirred coffee, her laughter echoing in their villa on the coast of Nice, the way she'd squeeze his hand when nervous during gala events, always seeking grounding. He had loved her more deeply than anyone else in his life. And he had lost her, violently, suddenly, unfairly. The memory of that rainy night haunted him still. The flashing lights, the crushed metal, the cold officials telling him they'd found the car but not her. And eventually, a funeral without a body. He had mourned her for years. Refused to remarry. Built his empire larger and higher but felt more hollow with every floor. Anna had been the only person who saw through the power, the money, the weight of his name. She had loved the man, not the fortune. Now, in a dusty corner shop across town, her image stood alive and breathing behind a counter, smiling at strangers like she hadn't vanished off the face of the earth 7 years ago. Was he going insane? Was grief finally distorting his sense of reality? Or, had she never died at all? He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, but her face kept flashing before him. There was something in her expression, not just familiarity, but distance. Like a person sleepwalking through a life that wasn't truly theirs. Did she not recognize him? Or was she hiding something? Suddenly, he couldn't stand being outside anymore. He needed to go back in. To hear her speak again. To ask her name. To understand something, even if it broke him all over again. He turned around, pushed open the door, and re-entered the little shop, 1,000 memories dragging behind him like chains. Daniel stepped back into the small shop with the unease of a man entering a dream he couldn't control. The bell above the door chimed again, softer this time, or perhaps it only seemed that way because of the sound roaring in his ears, his own pulse. She was still behind the counter, now rearranging a display of small, dusty bags of coffee. The sight of her in this simple setting, with fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, only deepened the surrealness of it all. How could someone so familiar exist here, in a life that clearly wasn't hers? Or, was it? Excuse me, he said, his voice more fragile than he'd expected. She looked up, and her expression remained kind but casual, the same one any shopkeeper gives a passing stranger. Yes. Can I help you with something? Her eyes met his, and they were exactly Anna's eyes. The shape, the color, the way they flickered with a strange internal warmth. But behind them was something different, a fog. A calm unawareness that chilled him. I don't mean to sound strange, but, you remind me of someone I knew. Very much so, he said, carefully studying her reaction. She tilted her head politely. Oh, I get that sometimes. I must have a common face. Her tone was friendly, but there was a flicker, barely a shadow, of discomfort. What's your name? He asked gently. The woman paused slightly, as though she had to think. Elena, she replied. Elena Mirova. Elena. Not Anna. But the rhythm of the name sounded like an echo of something once familiar. Mirova, he repeated quietly. Do you happen to have family in the south? Near Sochi, maybe. She shook her head. No. I grew up in Kemerovo, I think. Or at least, that's what I was told. She offered a small, sheepish laugh. I'm actually adopted. It's complicated. Daniel's blood ran cold. Adopted. Told. Complicated. Every word made his chest feel tighter. How long have you been working here? He asked. About 2 years, she said, brushing a hand over her apron absent-mindedly. Before that, I don't really remember much. I was in some kind of accident a while ago. Lost a lot of memory. Doctors said it was trauma-related. I try not to dwell on it. Daniel stared at her, frozen. She looked at him with a hesitant smile, trying to soften the awkwardness. I'm sorry, do we know each other? He took a step back, uncertain whether to cry or collapse. I think we might. But she didn't remember. Not him. Not their life. Not the love. Not yet. Daniel walked away from the counter slowly, his mind spinning. He didn't buy anything. He didn't even say goodbye. He stepped outside again, stood on the sidewalk like someone who had just woken up in a different version of the world. The city moved around him, cars passed, people talked on phones, horns honked, but everything felt distant. His world had narrowed down to one impossible thing, the woman inside that shop. The woman who called herself Elena, who had Anna's eyes, Anna's voice, Anna's hands. But who looked at him like he was a stranger. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had smiled, warm, polite, but hollow. Like she was trained to give that expression, like it was something she'd memorized instead of felt. Something inside her was missing. Or, buried. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse, surrounded by glass walls and city lights, but it all felt emptier than ever before. He poured himself a drink and stared out over Moscow, but all he saw was her face. How was it possible? After all these years, after everything he'd done to move on, she was suddenly here, alive. But with no memory, no recognition in her eyes. He replayed every moment of their conversation, analyzing each word, each pause. The way she had said, I was told, when talking about her past. The slight hesitation before giving her name. The way she hadn't asked why he'd been staring, as though she were used to it. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. He felt it in his bones. Over the next few days, he returned to the shop multiple times. Sometimes he went in to buy something, coffee, a snack, anything. Other times he just watched from a parked car across the street. She always looked the same, calm, focused, friendly to customers but never truly animated. Never really alive. It was as if she were playing a role someone had written for her. He noticed little things. She avoided mirrors. She flinched at sudden loud noises. She never spoke much to anyone except for simple transactions. And every time he came in, her expression seemed more guarded, like she was trying to place him but couldn't. Or maybe she was starting to feel the pull of something buried. One afternoon, he tried to ask more. Do you ever get dreams? He said carefully, standing by the counter. She blinked. Sometimes, she replied, but they don't make sense. Just water, crashing sounds, and sometimes someone calling my name, but not Elena. That was all the confirmation Daniel needed. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But this woman, this quiet shop assistant with half a life, was Anna. She just didn't know it yet. Daniel could no longer sit with the uncertainty gnawing at his mind. Each visit to the shop chipped away at his composure. The resemblance wasn't fading with familiarity, it was growing sharper, more convincing. Every moment she spoke, every subtle gesture she made, confirmed what his heart already believed but his logic refused to accept. And yet, logic alone would never give him peace. He needed answers. Real ones. He made the decision in the quiet of a sleepless night. At 2 in the morning, surrounded by photos of Anna that he hadn't dared look at in years, he picked up his phone and called Anton, a discreet private investigator he had worked with before, someone who specialized in difficult, often confidential, cases. "I need you to find out everything about a woman named Elena Mirova," Daniel said, voice low and urgent. "She works at a small grocery store on Bolshaya Dmitrovka. I want her history, her address, medical records, everything." Anton didn't ask questions. He simply replied, understood, and got to work. Over the next few days, Daniel stayed in close contact, unable to focus on his businesses or meetings. His body was present, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He returned to the shop again, this time not to speak with her but to observe. She moved like someone who had built a carefully constructed life, but there were cracks in the foundation. Once, a small child dropped a glass bottle near the register, and the shattering sound made her visibly flinch, her hand flying to her chest. Another time, she stared at a photograph on a carton of milk for far too long, an old monastery near the Volga, and her eyes brimmed with confusion, as if it pulled something unspoken from deep inside. Finally, Anton called. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Try me," Daniel replied. "There are no records of Elena Mirova before 7 years ago," Anton said. "Nothing. No school history, no official documents, nothing prior to a hospital registration after an accident outside Nizhny Novgorod. She was admitted as a Jane Doe. Head trauma. Memory loss. No ID. A local couple took her in through a private program, gave her a name, and that's where her life begins." 7 years ago. Daniel stood frozen in his office, phone clutched tightly in his hand. "Is there any photo from the hospital? From when she was admitted?" "I got one. And Daniel, it's her. It's Anna." His breath caught. Tears stung his eyes. 7 years ago. That was the year she vanished in the flood, when her car was swept into the river. They had never found a body. The authorities assumed she had drowned. He had accepted it, grieved it, tried to bury it, but Anna hadn't died. She had lived, without her name, without her memories, without him. Now, he had proof. But what he didn't have yet, was her. Daniel could hardly breathe as he stared at the photograph Anton had sent him. It was a grainy, low-resolution image, probably taken from an old hospital file, but it was enough. The woman in the photo had bruises along her temple, a medical bandage covering part of her forehead, and her hair was shorter, tangled. But the face, it was unmistakable. Even battered and half-conscious, it was Anna. No amount of time or trauma could erase the features he knew better than his own reflection. He paced the room for hours after that, torn between anguish and hope. How had she survived? Why had no one contacted him? How could someone just vanish into another identity without leaving a single clue behind? Anton's report laid it all out. She had been found on the side of a rural road, unconscious, clothes soaked and torn, with no form of ID. Locals believed she had been swept downstream in the aftermath of heavy rains and flooding. She had been taken to a small rural clinic in Nizhny Novgorod with head injuries and signs of hypothermia. No one came to claim her. When she woke, she remembered nothing, no name, no family, no home. The trauma had erased everything. For months she remained under the care of the hospital. A local social worker eventually placed her with a childless couple who had volunteered to care for patients who had no one else. They gave her the name, Elena. A surname was added later when her documents were created. It was all legal, paperwork signed, identity registered, and a quiet, modest life slowly began. Daniel was overwhelmed. She had been alive all this time, breathing, healing, waking up day after day thinking she was someone else. And while he had mourned, while he had stood by her empty grave, she had been trying to piece together a life from the fragments she had left. But more than the discovery itself, what struck him was the strange alignment of fate. What were the chances that he would end up in that neighborhood, step into that store, at that moment? It felt like the universe had guided him to her, not for answers but for redemption. Still, he was left with a single, burning question: if she had truly forgotten everything, would she even want to remember? Would she want to be Anna again? Or was Elena her truth now? He couldn't force her to accept what had been taken from her. He knew that. But he could show her. And maybe, just maybe, something inside her would awaken. Something familiar. Something real. It was time to stop watching from the shadows. It was time to help her remember who she truly was. Daniel sat in his car parked a block away from the store, the DNA kit resting on the passenger seat like a silent witness to what he was about to do. He had spent the last few days going over everything, planning each step with care. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want to push too hard. But he needed her to see the truth, not because he needed closure, but because she deserved to know who she really was. He had spoken to a trusted doctor and arranged a private, discreet DNA test that could be done with a simple swab. He would offer it to her gently, respectfully, without pressure. If she refused, he would accept that. But if she agreed, he rehearsed what he would say as he walked toward the shop. Every step felt like a leap into the unknown. Inside, she greeted him with a now familiar smile, though it was cautious, as if she sensed the weight in his presence lately. "Back again?" she asked, her voice light but curious. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly, stepping closer to the counter. "And I know how strange it's going to sound. But please hear me out." Her expression shifted, concern flickered in her eyes. She nodded slowly. "Okay. I believe you're someone I once loved," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I believe you're Anna. My wife." Her face paled. Her hands froze mid-movement. She stared at him, lips parting slightly, but no words came. "I know it sounds impossible," he continued. "But I've seen the hospital records. I've traced the accident. I know about the memory loss, about your new identity. And I found a photo, from the night you were taken to that clinic." She blinked, her body tense with disbelief. This is crazy. I don't even know who you are. I understand. And I don't expect you to believe me right away. But I have something," he said, pulling the small DNA kit from his coat. "A simple test. If you take it, and the results match, you'll have proof. Not just from me, but from science." She stared at the kit as if it were a bomb. Her breath quickened. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Because I've lost you once already," Daniel said softly. "I don't want to lose you again. But more than that, I think you deserve to know the truth. If there's even the slightest chance that you are Anna, don't you want to know?" The room was heavy with silence. She looked down, then away, then back at him. Her hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll do it." Later that evening, they met at the doctor's private office. The swab was quick, painless, and over in seconds. Daniel left that night feeling both terrified and hopeful. 3 days later, the results came back. 99.9% match. She was Anna. He hadn't imagined it. She was alive. Now came the hardest part, helping her remember the life they had shared, and the love that time hadn't managed to erase. The DNA results sat on the table between them, the paper stark against the warm wood. "Anna, no." Elena stared at the words without speaking. Her fingers traced the edge of the page, as if the truth might sink in through her skin. Across from her, Daniel waited, his eyes never leaving her face. He had thought this moment would be full of relief, that the confirmation would bring joy, even reunion. But the reality was far more fragile. "I don't know what to feel," she said finally, her voice low and trembling. "This says I'm Anna, that I had a husband. A whole life. But I don't remember any of it." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know. And I'm not asking you to suddenly become the woman you used to be. I just want you to know that you're not alone. That there's a past, yes, but there can also be a future. Whatever that means for you." She looked at him, her eyes full of confusion and sorrow. "I feel like I'm two people now. Elena is all I've ever known. But Anna is real, too. You're real. I see it in your face, in your eyes when you look at me. But it's like looking at a life I've only seen in someone else's dream." Daniel wanted to take her hand, but he didn't. "Not yet. I still love you," he said quietly. "Even after all this time. Even though you don't remember me. That hasn't changed." Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled faintly through them. "It's strange. There's a part of me that feels drawn to you. Like something inside me knows you, even if my mind doesn't. That was enough for him. It wasn't full recognition, not yet, but it was a start. They began spending more time together, not as husband and wife, but as two people relearning each other. He brought her to places they had visited in the past, the small art gallery near the riverbank, the quiet park where they once watched fireworks, the cafe that served her favorite cherry tea. Sometimes her expression would change, she'd pause, look around slowly, as if catching glimpses of something familiar just out of reach. Once, while walking by the river, she stopped suddenly. "I've been here before," she whispered. I remember water. The sound of it. And your hand. I think I held your hand here." Daniel looked at her, tears silently streaming down his cheeks. "Yes," he said. "You did." Day by day, pieces returned. A song she used to hum. The way she folded her napkin. The laugh that echoed his memory exactly. Her mind might not have recalled everything, but her soul never forgot. Months passed. And one evening, as they stood in the garden of Daniel's home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to him. "I think I'm ready to be Anna again," she said. "But only if I can also be Elena. Because both of them brought me back to you." He smiled, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. "Then we'll start from here. As whoever you choose to be." And with that, the woman he had lost, and found, stepped into his arms. Not as a shadow of the past, but as a promise for the future.